She called his hand-built bridge community property. But when she sent cement trucks over it again, Trenton Vale showed her exactly where her authority ended, and it wasn't on his land. The bridge didn't just give out. It snapped like a gunshot. 1 second, the cement truck was crawling across it, its tires creaking against the planks. The next, the back end dropped straight through, swallowed by a deep pool of clay and water. The sound echoed through the hollow like thunder. Mud splashed high enough to stain the driver's windshield. The man jumped out, boots sinking instantly into the sludge, shouting, "What the hell is this?" From his porch, Trenton Vale didn't move. He just watched. Arms crossed, face calm, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at his mouth. To anyone else it looked like a freak accident, but Trenton knew better. He'd spent the past week waiting for this exact moment. The truck driver tried gunning the engine, but the back tires only spun deeper. The smell of burnt rubber filled the morning air. Birds scattered from the trees, and the noise drew neighbors out onto their lawns. One woman covered her mouth. Another whispered, "That's Trenton's bridge." "Isn't it?" Judith Bramwell arrived within minutes. Her SUV screeched to a stop in front of Trenton's house. She stepped out with her clipboard, always with that clipboard, wearing her usual navy blazer, even in the heat. Her voice cut through the air like glass. "Mr. Vale! What on earth did you do?" Trenton didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip from his coffee mug, then walked down the steps, the wood creaking under his boots. "Funny," he said. "I was about to ask you the same thing." Judith's face flushed red. "This is private property damage. You'll be paying for this." Trenton's tone stayed even. "Private property? You mean mine?" The truck driver, a younger man with a Tennessee accent thick as syrup, raised his hands. "Ma'am, I was told this was the shortcut to the new build on Willow Bend Road." He pointed toward the other side of the creek, where tire marks ran straight from Judith's direction. "I didn't know it was somebody's yard." Trenton kept his eyes on her. "And who told you that?" The driver hesitated. "The lady who runs the HOA." For a second, the only sound was the engine sputtering in the mud. Then Judith's voice dropped to a hiss. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Trenton looked past her, at the bridge. The water glistened beneath the broken planks, sunlight bouncing off the clay. "No," he said. "Just tired." Behind them, neighbors had gathered closer, a half-circle of quiet spectators pretending not to stare. Everyone knew about Judith. Everyone knew about her warnings, her letters, her friendly reminders about lawn heights and fence colors. Nobody dared challenge her. Until now. Judith marched up to him, heels sinking slightly into the grass. "This is unacceptable. I'll have the county involved by noon. You'll be hearing from our lawyers." Trenton didn't blink. He pulled a small folder from under his arm, opened it, and held it out. Inside were maps, photos, and boundary records. The top page was marked with a county stamp. "You might want to look at this before you start making calls," he said. "That bridge? It's on my land, every inch. The trucks you sent through it were trespassing. I've got pictures, dates, even video." I tried to warn you. Judith froze for a moment. She wasn't used to people coming prepared. Her eyes darted between the folder and the broken bridge. The driver stood awkwardly nearby, kicking mud off his boots. "You set this up," she muttered. "You wanted this to happen." Trenton's voice dropped lower. "No, you made it happen. I just built something to show you where my property ends." The driver scratched the back of his neck. "So, am I good to call my boss, or—" Trenton gave a half smile. "You might want to tell him to bring a tow. That truck's not going anywhere for a while." The crowd let out a few muffled laughs. Judith spun on her heel, fuming, her face the color of her lipstick. She stomped back toward her SUV, muttering something about violations and reports. Trenton turned away, heading back toward his porch. But as he walked, he glanced once more at the wrecked bridge. A week ago, it had been whole. He could still hear the sound of it breaking. Not from the truck, but from the time before, when Judith had ignored every warning. The morning the first boards cracked under another load. The day he realized he couldn't just sit back anymore. He looked down at his hands. Rough, calloused, but steady. The same hands that had built that bridge from nothing. But to understand how it came to this, the trap, the broken bridge, the public humiliation, you've got to know how the fight began. Long before anyone knew his name in the neighborhood, Trenton Vale was just another man trying to build something of his own. He'd grown up in Memphis, the oldest of 3 brothers, raised by a father who believed that if something broke, you fixed it with your own hands. That lesson stuck. By the time Trenton was 40, he'd saved enough to buy a small piece of land outside Clarksville, Tennessee, where the noise of the city faded into the soft hum of cicadas and the rustle of old oak leaves. His house wasn't big, a 1-story brick home with a narrow porch, an aging rocking chair, and a flagstone path that led straight to the creek. The property had been neglected when he bought it. Fences were leaning, the grass had gone wild, and the bridge across the creek was barely standing. Most people would have called a contractor. Trenton just grabbed a toolbox. That bridge became his project, not just a piece of wood over water, but a statement. Every weekend he worked on it. He measured, sanded, stained, and reinforced each beam himself. He used cedar planks from a lumberyard in Dover, the kind that could stand against storms. His hands would be blistered by sunset, but there was a satisfaction in that pain. He told a neighbor once, "When you build something with your hands, it knows who you are." The bridge stood about 30 feet long, sturdy enough for his ATV or the small trailer he used for yard work. It crossed a narrow creek that glimmered under the morning sun. On quiet days, he'd stand there with a fishing pole, boots in the mud, watching minnows dart under the shadow of his own handiwork. Life was slow, simple, and peaceful. Until Judith Bramwell moved in. She arrived like a gust of wind that didn't know how to stop. A new homeowner, recently appointed head of the Riverside Meadow HOA, she wasted no time sending letters. Trash cans must not be visible from the street. All fences must match the HOA approved color palette. Yard decorations require board approval. Trenton ignored the first few notes. He paid his dues on time, kept his yard clean, and didn't bother anyone. But Judith seemed to have him in her sights. She'd walk by his property twice a week, clipboard in hand, stopping just long enough to take photos. One day she called out, "Mr. Vale, you're aware that structures extending beyond the designated residential line must be reviewed by the board, right?" Trenton looked up from trimming his hedges. "If you mean the bridge, it's been here since before I bought the place. I just fixed it." Judith smiled in that way that didn't feel like smiling. "Well, any modifications are considered new constructions. I'll need documentation." "Documentation for fixing something that's mine?" She didn't answer directly. "It's protocol." Then she walked away. That was the first spark. Weeks later, when construction began on a few new homes across the creek, Trenton started noticing something strange. Tire tracks cut through his grass, heading toward the bridge. He thought maybe a teenager had taken a shortcut, but then he saw it. A cement truck, slowly crawling across the wooden planks he'd built with his own hands. He dropped his rake and shouted, "Hey! You can't go through there!" The driver leaned out the window. "Lady up the street said it was a service road." Trenton waved his arms. "It's not. That's private property." But the truck was already across. The planks groaned, and his chest tightened as he watched one of the beams bend under the weight. The driver gave a lazy wave and drove off. Trenton could still see the deep ruts in his lawn hours later. He went straight to Judith's house that afternoon. Her driveway was lined with decorative stones, her flower beds perfectly symmetrical. When she opened the door, she looked almost pleased to see him. "Miss Bramwell," he began, "your construction guys are driving over my bridge." "They're tearing up my yard," she raised an eyebrow. "Oh, that. They're using the quickest route to the new development. It's temporary." "It's not a route. It's my property. You don't have permission." Her voice was calm, deliberate. "Technically, Mr. Vale, that area could be considered common use. The creek runs along the shared boundary. Not that part." I checked the maps. "Well," she said, "maybe you should have come to the HOA meeting last week. We discussed accessibility concerns for the new builds." Trenton felt his jaw tighten. "You can't vote to use my land." Judith gave a little shrug. "The board approved it." When she closed the door, Trenton stood there for a long moment, staring at the smooth white wood. He could feel heat rising in his chest, not just anger, something heavier. A sense that she didn't see him at all. To her, he was just an obstacle on paper. Back at home, he walked down to the bridge again. One of the boards was already split clean across. He crouched down and ran his fingers over the crack. His reflection in the creek looked tired, older than he remembered. He sat there until sunset, listening to frogs croak under the brush, trying to figure out how far this would go. But the trucks didn't stop, and neither did she. And that's when the real trouble started. By the end of that summer, everyone in Riverside Meadow knew who Judith Bramwell was. She wasn't the type to hide behind emails or polite notices. She preferred confrontation, face to face, standing tall, her tone wrapped in authority. She'd lived in the neighborhood less than a year, but she already acted like she'd founded it. Judith was in her mid-50s, always dressed as if she were on her way to a board meeting downtown. Pressed slacks, white blouse, a pin in the shape of a key clipped to her collar. People said she'd once worked in real estate, but nobody knew for sure. What they did know was that once she became HOA president, she made herself impossible to ignore. She changed mailbox heights, banned wind chimes, even sent a written warning to a retired couple because their grandson left a basketball hoop out overnight. It was the kind of control that most neighbors tolerated, quietly, resentfully. Trenton, however, wasn't wired that way. The first time she came to his property uninvited was a Tuesday afternoon. Trenton had just finished patching a hole in his fence when he saw her walking up the driveway, clipboard ready, as usual. "Mr. Vale?" she called out. "We need to talk." He wiped his hands on a rag. "If it's about the trucks, I've already said—" "It's not about that," she interrupted. "It's about your bridge." The HOA has received several complaints that it's obstructing community access to the creek. Trenton stared at her. "Community access? Nobody even fishes down there but me." Judith gave that polished smile. "Still, we have to keep things uniform. The bridge doesn't meet the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. It might be necessary to have it removed." He laughed. Not out of amusement, but disbelief. "Removed? I built that bridge myself. And I respect that," she said, in a tone that made it clear she didn't. "But private modifications that interfere with community harmony are discouraged. You understand." Trenton stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Let me make something clear. That bridge sits on my property. It doesn't interfere with anyone's harmony but yours." She didn't blink. "Then I'll expect documentation proving that by the end of the week." And just like that, she turned and left, heels clicking against his driveway. That night, Trenton dug through his filing cabinet until he found his property survey. The bridge was well within his boundary lines, nearly 12 feet inside. He took photos, printed copies, and even drove down to the Montgomery County Office of Property Assessment the next morning to get an official stamp. When he handed Judith the documents later that day, she looked unimpressed. "We'll have to review this with the board," she said, tucking the folder under her arm. "There is no board," he replied. "There's you," she smiled again, the kind of smile that said, "We'll see." From then on, the tension between them became public. Judith started finding reasons to appear near his property. She claimed she was monitoring for compliance. Once she even stopped a delivery truck at the entrance to his driveway and asked the driver what he was bringing. Trenton's patience began to wear thin. "You don't need to monitor anything over here," he told her. "Everything's fine." "Mr. Vale," she said in her clipped tone, "I'm simply ensuring fairness. Rules are what keep neighborhoods from falling apart." "Or from breathing," he muttered. But the moment that really defined their feud came one Friday afternoon. The construction crews were back, and this time, 2 cement trucks lined up behind Judith's SUV. She stood out front, pointing toward the creek, directing them across his property as if she owned it. Trenton came out of his garage, shouting over the engine noise, "Stop those trucks! You can't drive through there!" Judith turned, her voice calm and sharp. "We're on a schedule, Mr. Vale. Please don't interfere with authorized activity." "Authorized by who?" "The HOA." "That's not legal, Judith." "You're welcome to file a complaint," she replied, as the first truck began to move. The ground trembled. The wood creaked. Trenton's hands clenched into fists. He watched helplessly as the heavy tires rolled over the bridge, the same one he'd built piece by piece. A crack echoed through the air, and he felt something twist in his stomach. When the truck finally reached the other side, the damage was clear. One of the supporting beams had split. Judith didn't even look back. She simply waved to the driver and drove off, leaving tire marks carved into Trenton's grass. Later that night, Trenton stood on the bridge with a flashlight, inspecting the damage. His neighbor Cole Finney, a retired mechanic, walked over from next door. "She really letting those trucks use your bridge?" Cole asked. Trenton nodded, jaw tight. "Says it's for the good of the community." Cole snorted. "Community, my foot. She just likes control." They stood in silence, the beam of the flashlight catching the small fractures spreading across the wood. "You're gonna need to fix that," Cole said. "Oh, I will," Trenton replied, voice low. "But not the way she expects." But before he could even begin to plan, things were about to get worse. Much worse. The following Monday began like any other morning. The sun hung low over Clarksville, the kind of humid Tennessee heat that makes the air feel thick even before noon. Trenton was out back cleaning his tools when he heard the sound again. That deep, throaty rumble that made his stomach tighten. He dropped the wrench and turned toward the creek. Dust clouds rose in the distance. Not one, but 2 cement trucks were inching down the narrow gravel path toward his bridge. He muttered to himself, "You've got to be kidding me." The first truck slowed at the edge, the driver leaning out of the window. "Hey, Mr. Vale, we've got permission to cross again." Same as last week, Trenton marched toward him, voice cutting through the engine noise. "Permission from who?" "The HOA lady. Judith, right? Said this is the shortcut to the new builds. Said it was all cleared." Trenton's boots kicked up dust as he waved his arms. "It's not cleared. That's my bridge. You take that truck over, it's going to snap." The driver shrugged. "She's paying by the hour, not me." And before Trenton could get another word out, the driver hit the gas. The bridge groaned under the weight. Trenton's heart pounded as the wooden beams bent, the sound of splintering wood echoing through the trees. He shouted again, "Stop! You're going to break it!" But the driver kept going until the truck made it across. Behind it, the second truck hesitated. The driver leaned out, looking uncertain. "You sure it's safe?" The first driver laughed, tapping his steering wheel. "Feels solid enough." That's when it happened. A sound like a tree splitting in two. One of the main supports cracked down the middle, the entire bridge dipping several inches. Both drivers froze. Trenton's face turned pale. He could almost feel the weight of every hour he'd spent building it. "Get that thing off!" he yelled, motioning frantically. The first driver tried backing up, but the damage was done. By the time the second truck attempted to cross, the far end of the bridge gave way, sending the back tires into the creek. Mud and water splashed everywhere. The driver cursed and jumped out. "You said it was fine!" Trenton could feel his throat tighten. "I told you both! That bridge can't take those loads." The 2 men started arguing, pointing toward the road. "We're calling the HOA," one said. Trenton turned toward his house. "Good idea. Call her. Tell her to bring her clipboard." Within 20 minutes, Judith's black SUV came speeding down the gravel road, dust trailing behind it. She stepped out, sunglasses on, expression unreadable. "What happened here?" she asked, scanning the scene. "What happened?" Trenton shot back. "Is your people destroyed my property?" Her voice stayed smooth. "Our contractors were using a designated path. If there was damage, we'll address it through proper channels." "There are no proper channels," he snapped. "That's my land. You don't own it, the HOA doesn't own it, and I sure didn't give you permission." Judith sighed. "Mr. Vale, we can't have everyone doing whatever they please with communal areas. If every homeowner acted this way, this neighborhood would be chaos." "It's not communal." His voice rose, hands trembling. "That bridge is mine. I built it. Every plank, every screw, my money, my work." She tilted her head, voice dripping with condescension. "Well, perhaps you should have attended the HOA meetings before making those decisions." That last word cut through him like a blade. "Decisions? You seem to think private ownership exempts you from rules. It doesn't. We'll send you an invoice for the damage, an invoice." The word echoed in his mind. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The two drivers, still standing by their trucks, exchanged uneasy glances. One muttered, "Lady, it was your call. We just followed orders." Judith turned sharply. "That's enough." Trenton stepped closer. "You know what's enough? You using people like pawns to do your dirty work." She gave a short laugh. "You've made this personal, Mr. Vale." "No," he said quietly. "You did." For a moment, neither of them moved. The cicadas buzzed somewhere in the trees, and the only sound was the slow drip of muddy water from the truck's wheels. Then Judith broke the silence. "I'll have the insurance representative come by this week," she said, brushing off her jacket. "In the meantime, I'd recommend staying calm. It's just a bridge." She walked back toward her SUV, but before she opened the door, Trenton said, "You ever build something with your own hands?" She paused. "I don't see how that's relevant. That's the difference between us. You see rules. I see work, sweat, time. You destroy things you don't understand." Judith didn't answer. She climbed into her car and drove away. Trenton stood there, boots heavy in the mud, the remains of his bridge half submerged. He felt anger, yes, but beneath that, a strange kind of sadness. It wasn't about wood or money. It was about being stepped on, again. That night, sitting on his porch, he stared at the dark line of the creek, barely visible under the moonlight. He didn't know what he was going to do yet, but he knew one thing. This wasn't over. But he had no idea just how far he'd go, or how much one act of quiet defiance would shake the entire neighborhood. The next morning, the sound of hammers and engines echoed across the neighborhood again. Trenton stood by his kitchen window, staring at the mess by the creek. His bridge, half sunk, splintered, torn apart, wasn't just broken. It was humiliated. The water that ran beneath it now carried chunks of wood and streaks of concrete dust. He'd spent years building peace on that land, and in a few reckless hours it had been destroyed by people who didn't even live there. He poured himself a cup of coffee, but the mug trembled slightly in his hand. Anger wasn't new to him, but this was different. It was controlled, slow burning, and quiet. Later that day, Judith showed up again, clipboard in hand, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Two men in reflective vests followed behind. "Insurance assessors," she said. They didn't greet him. They didn't look at him. They just walked around the bridge, snapping photos and taking notes. Trenton stepped outside, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You bringing the press next?" he asked. Judith didn't smile. "This is standard procedure, Mr. Vale. We have to determine liability." "Liability?" he repeated. "You mean the people who trespassed and broke my bridge?" Her tone turned clipped. "We're reviewing whether that section is, in fact, private property. Until then, I'd appreciate your cooperation." He pointed toward the boundary markers, metal stakes in the ground he'd measured himself. "You can review all you want, but those markers don't move." Judith ignored him and turned to one of the inspectors. "Make sure you photograph the supports." "I believe they weren't up to regulation." That was it. Trenton laughed, not out of amusement, but disbelief. "You're unbelievable." Judith straightened her blazer. "And you're emotional. It's never wise to take these things personally. Lady, you sent cement trucks over something I built with my own hands. You think that's not personal?" The inspectors glanced at each other, uncomfortable. Judith, of course, didn't flinch. "As I said, the board will handle it." When they finally left, Trenton stood in silence, his jaw locked tight. His neighbor, Cole Finney, appeared again at the fence line, cigarette in hand. "She's pushing you," Cole said. "Trying to get you to lose it." Trenton looked at him, eyes hard. "I'm not losing anything. I'm taking it back." Cole raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" Trenton didn't answer right away. "Meaning it's time she learns that some people can't be walked over." For the next few days, he avoided her entirely. But her presence was everywhere. Letters slipped into his mailbox, new rules emailed to the neighborhood. She'd even placed a temporary construction access sign near his property, as if to prove she still had the upper hand. He kept every letter, every photo, every small piece of proof. Late one night, he sat at his kitchen table surrounded by papers. The old survey map was spread out in front of him. He ran his finger along the line, marking his boundary, and whispered, "You crossed it, Judith. You crossed it," and thought no one would stop you. That was when the idea began to take shape. Not revenge, something smarter. Something that would make her face the consequences of her own arrogance without breaking a single law. The next morning, he started clearing the debris from the creek. He worked for hours, hauling splintered planks and broken nails into piles. Sweat ran down his temples, but he kept going. When the last of the wreckage was gone, he stood over the creek, hands on his hips, eyes fixed on the empty space. That night, Judith sent another notice, a formal warning for damaging communal property. He read it, folded it neatly, and placed it beside his coffee mug. He didn't even bother replying. Instead, he went to work. He spent his evenings at the Home Depot in Hopkinsville, buying fresh lumber, bolts, and tools. The cashier, a young man named Evan, noticed him returning several times over the week. "You building something big?" Evan asked. Trenton smiled slightly. "You could say that." He worked after sunset, the faint glow of his workshop light visible from the street. Cole would sometimes stop by, offering a beer or a hand. "You rebuilding the bridge already?" he asked one night. "Not exactly," Trenton replied. "I'm improving it." Cole gave him a curious look. "What kind of improvements?" "The kind that teaches respect." Cole let out a low whistle. "You're planning something, huh?" Trenton didn't deny it. He kept hammering, his rhythm steady, deliberate. When Judith passed by the next morning, she slowed her car to watch. "I hope you're following HOA standards this time," she called out. Trenton didn't look up. "Don't worry. Everything's by the book." She didn't realize which book he meant. By the end of the week, the bridge stood again, stronger, cleaner, almost too perfect. Every plank was polished, every joint sealed. But beneath that fresh coat of stain lay something no one could see. A hidden mechanism, carefully designed to give way under heavy pressure, just enough to trap without harming. He leaned on the railing that night, listening to the creak. The reflection of the moon shimmered across the new boards. "Looks good," Cole said from behind him. Trenton nodded slowly. "It's ready." But before the trap could spring, one more confrontation would set the whole neighborhood on edge, and make sure everyone was watching when the lesson began. The bridge looked brand new, almost elegant. From the street, you'd never guess what was hiding underneath it. Every line was clean, every bolt perfectly placed. Judith drove by twice that week, slowing her SUV just enough to stare, but not enough to stop. Trenton knew she couldn't resist inspecting his work. He wanted her curious and confident. He spent the evenings in his workshop, surrounded by sawdust and the hum of a small radio. On the table beside him lay blueprints sketched on notebook paper, covered in coffee stains and rough calculations. He'd designed a frame beneath the planks that could collapse in sections when a certain weight rolled over it, harmless to a person, but a nightmare for something heavy, like a cement truck. The center would drop about 3 feet into a shallow pit lined with wet clay and water. It wasn't deep enough to cause danger, just enough to embarrass whoever tried crossing again. He called it his quiet justice. Cole stopped by one evening, resting his arm on the doorframe. "You sure about this, man?" "She's got connections, and you know how these HOA folks are. They love paperwork more than people Trenton didn't stop hammering. She won't have paperwork for this. I've got permits, survey maps, everything legit. I even made sure it drains properly. There's not a thing illegal about what I'm doing." Cole grinned. "So, it's legal revenge?" Trenton smirked. "Call it creative boundary enforcement." They both laughed, but underneath the humor was something sharper, that quiet satisfaction of taking back control from someone who thought they owned you. For days, the bridge sat untouched. Judith didn't call, didn't write, didn't send another email. It was strange, too quiet. Trenton had a feeling she was waiting, letting him believe the feud had cooled down. But she wasn't the kind of woman to back off easily. He was right. The following Friday, he spotted 2 unfamiliar pickup trucks at the far end of the street. Big, loud, and covered in dried cement. He felt that familiar pulse in his chest, the same mix of anger and anticipation that had been building for weeks. He stepped off his porch and walked down to the mailbox, pretending to check his mail as one of the drivers approached. "Hey man," the driver said, flipping up his sunglasses. "We're supposed to pour for the property over the creek. HOA lady said we could use this way again. Said it was all fixed." Trenton looked at him for a long moment. "Yeah," he said slowly. "It's fixed." The driver nodded, hopped back in the truck, and started down the path. The gravel crackled beneath the tires, and Trenton turned, walking calmly toward his porch. Cole was already leaning on the fence, eyes wide. "She's doing it again?" Cole called out. Trenton didn't answer. He just sat on the porch steps, coffee mug in hand, watching. The first truck reached the bridge and rolled forward. The wood creaked slightly, but everything held. The second truck followed close behind, heavy with cement. Then came that sound. Faint at first, then louder. A soft groan that turned into a deep crack. The driver shouted something, but it was too late. The center planks gave way with a loud snap, and the back tires sank straight into the clay pit below. The front half of the truck stayed on the bridge, tilted upward like a stranded boat. Mud splashed high onto the driver's door. "Anova!" The driver threw open the door and jumped down, boots sliding in the muck. He looked up at the bridge, then back at Trenton, who was still sitting quietly on his porch. "You did this!" the driver yelled. Trenton shrugged. "It's my bridge. I built it. If it can't hold your truck, maybe you shouldn't be driving on it." The second driver pulled up short, refusing to move any closer. "Man, I told you this was somebody's property," he said to his partner. That's when Judith's SUV came roaring around the bend, just like he'd expected. She stepped out, heels clicking, face tight with fury. "What happened here?" she demanded. The trapped driver gestured wildly toward the pit. "Your shortcut just swallowed my truck." Judith's head whipped toward Trenton. "You're going to pay for this, Mr. Vale." "This is sabotage." He stood up slowly, walked down the steps, and approached her. "Sabotage? That's a strong word. I rebuilt my bridge. It's private property. What happens when people trespass isn't my problem." She glared at him. "You think this is funny?" "I think it's justice," he said quietly. "You broke it once. I rebuilt it better. You told your people it was yours. Now everyone gets to see who's been lying." The truck driver had already called his supervisor. Another neighbor, Patricia North, came out from her yard with her phone, recording everything. "Y'all might want to stop yelling," she said. "This looks like a whole lawsuit waiting to happen." Judith snapped. "Turn that off, Patricia." Patricia didn't. She just said, "Freedom of information, honey." Trenton couldn't help but smile. The neighborhood was finally watching. The power Judith had carried like a crown was slipping, inch by inch, in front of everyone's eyes. Judith pointed a shaking finger at him. "You're finished, Mr. Vale. I'll make sure of it." Trenton met her gaze, calm as ever. "You've already done enough damage. The rest is on record." She hesitated. "What record?" He lifted a small GoPro camera from the porch railing. "This one." Her face drained of color. But the moment of confrontation was only the beginning. Because when the authorities arrived, the real shock came not from the trap, but from what they discovered beneath it. The sirens came fast. Within 15 minutes, 2 sheriff's cruisers rolled up the gravel road, lights flashing. Word had spread faster than wildfire. Half the neighborhood was out by now, phones raised, recording every second. It wasn't every day something like this happened in Riverside Meadow. Deputy Rick Hanley stepped out first, tall and broad, his hand resting on his belt. He took one look at the scene. A cement truck, nose up on a half-collapsed bridge. Mud everywhere. Judith Bramwell standing rigid with her arms crossed, and let out a slow sigh. "All right," he said. "Who's in charge here?" Judith immediately pointed at Trenton. "He is!" "He rigged the bridge to collapse under my construction team's vehicle. This is criminal sabotage." Trenton didn't say a word at first. He let the deputy look around. The smell of wet cement hung thick in the air, and the trapped truck hissed faintly from the pressure lines. After a pause, Trenton spoke evenly. "Officer, the bridge is on my property. I have every right to repair, rebuild, or modify it as I see fit. And," he said, handing over a folder, "I've got full documentation of that fact. including county permits and dated photos. Deputy Hanley opened the folder. Inside were the stamped property records, survey maps, and even time-stamped photos of the rebuilt bridge. Trenton had been smart enough to take them at every stage of construction. Judith's voice rose an octave. "You can't seriously be taking his side. He set a trap." The deputy turned toward her. "Ma'am, did you have permission to use this bridge?" Her jaw tightened. "The HOA approved the route." "HOA isn't a government authority," Hanley replied calmly. "If this bridge is on Mr. Vale's property, that's private land. You can't direct trucks through it without his consent." Judith's cheeks flushed. "That's not how it works. The HOA rules. Don't override property law." Hanley interrupted. The crowd murmured. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to smile. Meanwhile, the driver, still stuck in the clay pit, climbed onto the truck's hood. "Hey, can somebody just call a tow before this thing sinks any deeper?" Trenton kept his expression calm, though inside he could feel a weight lifting. Weeks of frustration, humiliation, and silence were unraveling right in front of her, but not by his hand, by her own arrogance. Judith tried to regain control. "Officer, this man deliberately created a hazard. He endangered public safety." Trenton gestured toward the bridge. "Public safety. There's nothing public about this, ma'am. You trespassed. Your trucks damaged private property twice. I simply rebuilt what was mine. If someone drove where they weren't supposed to, that's on them." Hanley scratched his chin. "I'm not seeing any violation here. If anything, we've got unauthorized access to private land." The color drained from Judith's face. "You can't be serious." The deputy radioed for the tow crew. "I'd suggest you all settle this civilly. But if it were me," he added, turning to Trenton, "I'd press for compensation. Looks like you've got all the proof you need." Judith spun toward the small crowd that had gathered. "You all saw what happened." "He set this up." Patricia North spoke up from across the street, camera still rolling. "Yeah, we saw. We also saw your trucks crossing his yard all week. Maybe the HOA should mind its own business for once." That comment sparked laughter. Quiet at first, then louder. Judith turned, glaring at her neighbors one by one. The power she once held, the intimidation, the authority, was slipping away like mud between her fingers. Trenton stepped forward, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You could have just asked, Judith. You could have come to me, and we would have worked something out. But you chose to treat me like a problem instead of a person." For the first time, she didn't have a quick reply. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The tow truck arrived soon after, chain clanking, engine rumbling. It took nearly an hour to pull the cement truck free. The bridge held steady through the whole process, though everyone could see the damage. Deep tire ruts, splintered planks, chunks of dried cement embedded in the wood. Before leaving, Deputy Hanley walked back over to Trenton. "You did everything right here. If she keeps bothering you, file a restraining complaint or get a lawyer involved. Folks like her don't quit until they're forced to." Trenton nodded. "Thanks, officer. I've got it from here." When the cruisers finally left, the crowd began to thin. A few neighbors walked over to him, offering quiet pats on the back or a simple nod of respect. Cole approached last, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Well," Cole said, "I'd say that's a solid win." Trenton let out a breath, almost a laugh. "More like a lesson?" Cole smirked. "You think she learned it?" "Not yet," Trenton said, "but she will." He looked toward Judith's SUV as it sped off, tires squealing down the road. For all her anger and bluster, she'd seen what happened when someone pushed too far. The bridge might have been the battlefield, but what broke that day wasn't wood. It was control. That night, Trenton stood by the creek again, flashlight in hand. The moonlight shimmered over the surface, the water calm and still. He took a deep breath, the air thick with damp earth and quiet triumph. The neighborhood had watched him stand his ground without raising his voice or breaking a rule. It wasn't revenge that satisfied him. It was justice done cleanly, undeniably, and in plain sight. But even after the trucks were gone and the road was silent again, Judith wasn't finished, and Trenton was about to learn that humiliation doesn't always stop people. Sometimes it makes them dangerous. 2 days passed. The mud had settled around the creek, but the tension hadn't. Judith Bramwell had gone silent. No visits, no letters, no HOA notices tucked under doors. For the first time in months, the neighborhood was calm. Too calm. Trenton didn't trust it. People like Judith didn't disappear. They plotted. On Wednesday evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, he was sitting on his porch when he heard the sharp crunch of tires on gravel. Her SUV appeared again, stopping right at the edge of his property. She didn't get out right away. The engine idled for a long moment, humming like a warning. Finally, the door opened. Judith stepped out, wearing her usual blazer, but her expression was different this time, tighter, sharper, her eyes cold. She walked toward the porch, her heels digging into the dirt, clipboard in hand as always. "Mr. Vale," she said, her tone restrained but sharp. "We need to have a serious conversation." Trenton didn't move. "About what? My bridge? Your trucks?" Her eyes flicked toward the creek. "About the fact that you humiliated me in front of the entire neighborhood." He gave a short laugh. "You did that to yourself, Judith." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I had authority. I was acting under community guidelines. And you—" She pointed at him, her hand trembling slightly. "You set me up to fail. You made me look like a fool." He leaned forward in his chair, elbows on his knees. "You didn't need my help for that. You just needed a mirror." For a second, she didn't respond. The air between them tightened, the cicadas buzzing louder in the trees. Then she spoke again, quieter this time. "You think this is over, don't you?" "I think it should be." She shook her head slowly. "You don't understand how this works. People like you think you can just do whatever you want because you own a patch of dirt. But neighborhoods need structure, order. Someone has to keep things in line." Trenton stood now, his shadow stretching across the porch. "That order you're talking about. It's just control. You use rules like weapons. I use them to protect standards," she fired back. "Standards don't mean much when you forget about people." Her voice cracked for a second, revealing something raw beneath the polished tone. "You embarrassed me, Trenton, in front of everyone. Do you know what that does to someone like me?" He paused. "Maybe it makes them realize they're not untouchable." She took a step closer, close enough for him to see the faint tremor in her jaw. "I could ruin you, you know. The HOA has power, connections. You think those neighbors clapping for you will still cheer when your property fees triple? When your name's dragged through paperwork?" Trenton's voice stayed even. "If that's what you need to feel better, go ahead. But I'm not moving an inch. Not from this porch, not from this bridge, not from the truth." Judith stared at him, breathing heavily, her hands clenched around her clipboard. "You think you won, but you don't win against people like me. You just delay the inevitable." He tilted his head slightly. "You ever get tired of fighting, Judith? Of trying to control every piece of dirt that isn't yours?" She blinked. For just a second, her face softened. Not much, but enough for him to see the exhaustion behind her defiance. It was gone just as quickly. "You'll regret this," she said finally. "I promise you that." Then she turned and walked away, her steps quick, sharp, deliberate. The SUV door slammed, gravel spraying behind her tires as she sped off. Trenton stood there for a long time, watching her disappear down the road. The sky was turning purple now, streaked with the last light of day. Cole walked over from next door, carrying 2 beers. "She came back, huh?" he said, handing one over. "Yeah," Trenton muttered. "Didn't take long." Cole popped the cap off his bottle. "She threaten you again?" Trenton gave a half smile. "Pretty much." Cole took a sip. "Man, you'd think after that mess she'd learn." Trenton looked toward the bridge, the wood glinting under the fading sun. Some people can't handle being wrong. To them, losing control feels like being disrespected. Cole nodded. "You gonna do anything about it?" "No," Trenton said, voice steady. "Not yet. The more she talks, the deeper she digs her own hole." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that carries weight. The sound of frogs echoed faintly from the creek. Cole finished his beer and stood. "Well, if she comes back with another truck, I'm bringing popcorn." Trenton chuckled quietly. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." As night fell, He walked back to the bridge one more time. The water below rippled softly, reflecting the stars. He leaned against the railing, feeling the rough wood beneath his hands. He wasn't proud of the trap, but he didn't regret it either. It wasn't revenge. It was a boundary, one that should have been respected from the start. He turned back toward his house, lights glowing warm through the windows. The storm might have passed for now, but something told him Judith wouldn't stay silent for long. But the next time she came after him, she wouldn't use trucks or threats. She'd use something much harder to fight: reputation. By Friday morning, the neighborhood felt different. The air carried that strange tension that follows a scandal everyone pretends not to talk about, but secretly can't stop whispering about. Every mailbox seemed to hold the same conversation in hushed tones. People slowed their walks when passing Trenton's house. Cars idled a little longer at the end of his driveway. He could feel the eyes, even if no one said a word. Judith Bramwell had gone quiet publicly, but Trenton soon realized silence didn't mean surrender. It meant strategy. That weekend, the HOA sent out an email to every homeowner in Riverside Meadow. The subject line read, "Community reminder, safety, cooperation, and compliance." The message didn't name him directly, but the wording left no doubt. It talked about individuals who took matters into their own hands, about reckless behavior compromising neighborhood safety, and about ongoing investigations into property violations. Trenton read it twice, then leaned back in his chair. "She's trying to paint me as a threat," he muttered. Cole called 10 minutes later. "You see that email?" "Yeah," Trenton said. "She's losing control and trying to save face." "Classic move." Trenton rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm not letting her twist this." That afternoon, he printed every record he had. The property deed, the photos, the county permits, even the officer's report from the day of the truck incident. He didn't send a message or write a defense. He simply pinned them all to his front door, clear as day. Anyone walking by could read the truth themselves. By sunset, half the neighborhood had stopped to look. A few neighbors even gave him a thumbs up. Others whispered to one another, glancing nervously toward Judith's house. But the woman herself didn't come by. Not that night, not the next day. Then Monday arrived, and so did the envelope. It was thick, official-looking, stamped with the HOA logo. Inside was a formal notice of fines, nearly $4,800 for unauthorized modifications to shared property, endangering community contractors, and failure to comply with board directives. Trenton stood at his mailbox, staring at the number. A fine. Nearly $5,000 for fixing his own bridge. He let out a slow exhale and walked inside. Cole stopped by an hour later. "She actually fined you?" $4,800, Trenton said, holding up the paper. "She's out of her mind." Cole leaned against the counter. "You know what she's doing, right? She's hoping you'll lose your temper. The moment you do, she's got leverage. That's her whole game." Trenton nodded slowly. "Then I'll play mine." He didn't yell. He didn't post online or show up at her door. Instead, he made one phone call. To the county office. 2 days later, a county inspector arrived unannounced, walking the property line with a clipboard of his own. He checked the markers, reviewed the permits, took photos, and asked a few quiet questions. By the time he was done, his expression said everything. "You're clean, Mr. Vale. Bridges within your boundary, paperwork's solid. She's got nothing." Trenton smiled faintly. "Appreciate it." The next HOA meeting was scheduled for that Thursday. It was open to homeowners, and Trenton hadn't attended one in years. Until now. He walked into the community hall just as Judith was speaking at the front, standing beside a projector that displayed slides of recent neighborhood concerns. When she noticed him, her voice faltered. The crowd turned. "Well?" Trenton said, his tone calm. "I figured I'd stop by since I seem to be one of those concerns." Judith's lips tightened. "Mr. Vale, this isn't the time." "No," he interrupted gently. "It's exactly the time." He walked closer, holding a folder. "Since everyone's been hearing half a story, I figured I'd share the rest." He opened the folder and began laying down papers on the table. His property deed, county inspection report, photos of the bridge, and the official police statement. Each page landed with a soft slap that echoed louder than any argument. "I tried reasoning," he said, looking straight at Judith. "I tried following your process. You ignored it, abused it, and cost me a bridge I built with my own hands. So I rebuilt it. By the law. And when your trucks trespassed again, I let the truth do the teaching." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the projector. One man in the back coughed awkwardly. Judith tried to speak. "You're twisting this into—" "I'm not twisting anything," Trenton said. "I'm done being quiet. You use this HOA to intimidate people who don't fit your mold, but the rules aren't weapons. They're supposed to protect us, not control us." A few heads nodded. Even the board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. One older woman finally spoke up. "He's right. She fined my son for having a shed that matched the house paint. This has gone too far." Judith's composure cracked for the first time. "This is slander." "No," Trenton replied softly. "This is accountability." He gathered his papers, tucking them neatly back into his folder. Then he looked around the room. "All I ever wanted was peace. But peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from boundaries." He turned and walked out, leaving a stunned audience behind. By the weekend, word had spread again, only this time, not against him. The HOA board called an emergency vote the next Monday. Judith Bramwell was asked to step down, pending internal review. Trenton didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He just went home, brewed a cup of coffee, and sat on his porch as the sun dipped low over the creek. The air felt lighter, the kind of quiet he hadn't known in months. Cole came by, hands in his pockets. "Looks like it's over." Trenton smiled faintly. Not over, just balanced again. But as the neighborhood settled into calm, there was still one more chapter to write. One final moment that would turn a small-town feud into a lasting lesson. The next few weeks rolled by quietly, like the world had finally exhaled. For the first time in months, the sound of trucks disappeared from the gravel road near the creek. The only noise Trenton heard now was the wind in the trees and the soft rustle of water under his bridge, standing proud and unbothered, just as it should. Judith Bramwell hadn't been seen much since that HOA meeting. Her name still popped up in neighborhood conversations, whispered at mailboxes or during evening walks, but never with the same fear it once carried. She'd lost something deeper than her position, her grip on people. One late afternoon, Trenton was sitting on his porch when he spotted a familiar figure walking slowly down the street. Judith. No clipboard, no blazer this time. Just a plain grey sweater and jeans. Her hair was tied back, her steps uncertain. He thought she might just pass by, but she didn't. She stopped at the edge of his yard, hesitated, then walked toward him. "Mr. Vale," she said quietly. "Miss Bramwell." The silence that followed stretched thin. The air smelled like rain. Clouds had started to gather above them. "I came to apologize," she said finally. Her voice wasn't sharp anymore. It sounded tired. "I went too far." Trenton didn't say anything. He just watched her, trying to read her face. "I let the position get to me," she continued. "When I moved here, I wanted to keep things organized, make it look like the neighborhoods I used to work with. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing people as people." Her words hung there for a moment, fragile but honest. Trenton nodded slowly. "You don't have to explain it to me. Just don't do it again." Judith's lips pressed into a faint, shaky smile. "I won't." She took a deep breath. "The board voted to drop all the fines. I made sure of that before I stepped down." "That's good to hear." She turned to leave, but paused halfway down the path. "For what it's worth, you were right about one thing. Control isn't the same as order. I just didn't see it until I lost it." Trenton leaned back in his chair, eyes softening. Sometimes it takes breaking something to understand how strong it really was. Judith gave a quiet nod, then walked back toward the road. She didn't look back. When she was gone, Cole appeared again from next door, holding 2 mugs of coffee this time. "Was that who I think it was?" he asked. Trenton smiled faintly. "Yeah, she came to make peace." Cole handed him a mug and sat down. "Never thought I'd see the day." "Me neither," Trenton said, looking toward the bridge. The wood glistened slightly under the growing drizzle. But I'm glad she did. They sat there for a while, listening to the rain tapping the porch roof. It wasn't much of a storm, just one of those soft southern rains that washes dust from the air and cools the earth. It felt right. After a while, Cole broke the silence. "You ever regret setting that trap?" Trenton thought for a moment before answering. No. Not because it embarrassed her, but because it showed everyone that standing your ground doesn't mean shouting or fighting. Sometimes it means proving your point quietly and letting the truth do the rest. Cole grinned. "You ought to write that down. Put it on a sign or something." Trenton chuckled. "Nah, the bridge says it better." The rain picked up slightly, tapping against the wooden railing. Across the creek, the muddy pit had long since dried up, covered now with grass and small wild flowers. Nature, it seemed, had moved on too. By nightfall, the sky cleared, leaving a deep Tennessee blue scattered with stars. Trenton stood by the bridge one last time that evening, the sound of water steady beneath him. He ran a hand along the railing, feeling the strength of it, not just in the wood, but in what it stood for. He whispered to himself, "Boundaries aren't walls, they're lines of respect. You don't draw them to keep people out. You draw them to remind people where they shouldn't cross." In the distance, a porch light flicked off. The neighborhood, for once, was at peace. Trenton turned and headed inside, the screen door creaking softly behind him. On the table sat the same folder that had started it all: property maps, photos, permits. He didn't need them anymore. Justice had already been served, not by courts or cops, but by patience, persistence, and proof. Before turning off the light, he looked out the window one last time. The bridge shimmered faintly under the moonlight, a reminder of everything he'd built, everything he'd protected, and everything he'd learned. And maybe, just maybe, a reminder to anyone watching that silence doesn't mean weakness. It means strength waiting for its moment. Because when people cross the line too many times, the ground eventually gives way. Respect isn't something you can enforce with rules or power. It's something you earn by knowing when to stand firm and when to let go. Sometimes doing what's right means staying calm when everything in you wants to fight. And when others misses authority, the strongest act of defiance is simply refusing to be broken. If this story kept you watching until the end, remember, it's not just about bridges or battles. It's about knowing your worth. So if you believe in standing your ground and defending what's yours with dignity, subscribe to the channel. More real stories, more lessons, and more moments that remind us how powerful quiet strength can be.